Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Paradigm Shifts podcast with your host, Keisha Kruger. I'm an organization development practitioner and executive coach working with leaders to create positive changes in the workplace using behavioral science. My personal mission? Share science-based tools and leadership insights from the field that you can use in the workplace and beyond. Considering we spend about 3/4 of our lifetime at work, there is incredible science and organizational psychology that can be used to rethink the way we work, lead, and ultimately live. Join me as I speak with thought leaders and business leaders in practice, unpacking lightbulb moments for paradigm shifts. Hello, everyone. On this week's episode, we chat with Alex Wisch, who shares a remarkable and important story with us around his journey with mental health. Above all, we chat about what it means to get into the state of flow and how you can get there. Alex Wisch is a leading peak human performance and executive flow coach. He has worked with top industry leaders to optimize their businesses, maximize productivity, create sustainable performance, improve their health, and elevate leadership skills. For more information about how to get in contact with Alex, learn more about his story, be sure to visit the show notes. Hi, Alex. How are you?
I'm good. It's a nice sunny day here in Boston.
Well, thank you for joining me. I am so excited to talk with you about flow. We've got a lot to chat about. So first off, I just want to say, and I think I've shared this with you before, when I was doing my master's program and I was doing it in positive psychology, I came across this concept of flow. And I pulled out the book that I actually earmarked it when I was doing my research because the concept of flow is something I think that I want to know if it resonates with you in the way that Martin Seligman in this book talks about it. So flow is considered an element of engagement. It's considered being one with the music, time stopping, the loss of self-consciousness during an absorbing activity. And so I'm curious to hear from you. Is that what flow means? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, no, so I would say that full immersion in your environment. So like you lose all sense of time. For me, it's as simple. The simplest way to explain it is if you're going into, like, you're in a coffee shop, you're talking with someone, then all of a sudden you look at the clock and 2 hours have gone by.
Yes.
That's like a flow state.
Okay, that's what it means to be in flow. It's like you've lost track of time.
Yeah, but also everything, I mean, exactly what it is. Everything's flowing. You don't have to really dig too hard in your brain to think of answers. It's all coming natural. And I also want to just add, like, you're pretty much living the best version of yourself. Your brain's working as efficient as possible. It's actually, you're not firing at all cylinders. You're just using the parts of your brain you absolutely need to use. Yeah, and you're almost, and in some situations, you're kind of pushing into your greatest potential that you're capable of doing in that given moment.
So if you're tapping into cognitive resources, would you say that you're also tapping into like emotional resources as well during that state?
Yes, I mean, that's a really great question.
Yeah.
Like, how do emotions play in flow? Well, I mean, more or less, a lot of people associate a sense of well-being with flow.
Yes, sir.
And for me, there's moments of flow that I look back at in some really distinct moments of my life. And one moment actually was like a life-saving moment where I don't really even recall my emotional state, to be honest.
Okay.
It was just like everything just came together, and it was just pulling everything together. And there was other moments I do kind of recall more of that kind of higher level of well-being. But that's a great question. That's something I probably should dive a little more into.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, you're a peak human performance executive flow coach. So tell me about how you came to be there and what does that like mean?
Sure. So coming into the world of being a peak, like, human performance coach, flow coach, in order to get there, I first had to hit the lowest point of my life, where I was pretty much the complete opposite of peak performance. I actually hit a point in my life. I was in college. I was a very high achieving student, one of the top of my classes, and then I hit burnout. I thought peak performance at one point was all about perfectionism. And that actually wasn't peak performance, because with perfectionism, you hit a point of productivity and then you start putting more and more input in or more, you start putting more and more effort and more hours, and your output actually doesn't shift,
Mm.
right? So that's not peak performance, and that's the issue with perfectionism versus like striving towards excellence. So early on, that happened to me. I hit a point where I had severe depression and complete burnout. In 8 years, about a decade of my life, so that, like I said, severe depression, to the point where literally I was on disability. Doctors told me I was not going to get better. I needed to accept my situation and kind of just keep moving on in my life and stop really, I would say, like getting so frustrated that in this desire to get better.
Just kind of like
And
accept the status quo.
they were telling me I've always been a driven person, and I just wouldn't, like, I knew, or at least I was in my mind, level of functioning, and I hit this really low level of functioning to minimal functioning, being unemployed. And they saw me struggling to fight it, and they're just like, stop fighting it, kind of more accept it, and just kind of live this quality of life. Now, to me, like, that just wasn't going to happen. I mean, most of these people, I kind of told them to go screw off, and I kind of just kept pushing forward. But when it came to peak performance, I mean, it comes into this world where there's a lot of different concepts. There's biohacking, where people can like take different supplements, and then there's how do you leverage your own internal thinking, your thought process, different behaviors and habits. And as I kind of evolved this story, I got to a point where I put so much attention on this idea that there's this external locus of control, meaning that there was some treatment or something that was going to fix me, something external, right?
Mm.
And I really just took away all my power and ability to change my situation, because everything was on hold until I found this thing that was going to fix me, right?
Right.
So there was a point when I was at a place where definitely wasn't going to get better. It was a place that was actually shut down by the Board of Mental Health 2 months after I left. But I ended up getting on a bike, left that place, and rode from 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning to more of a holistic treatment setting. Now, just prior to that, and this is in the depth of my depression, I was standing on a bridge over a railroad track, and I was contemplating, my life was so poor, I was contemplating, do I jump, or do I just do something so drastically different to change the projection of my life? And that's where I decided to go to this place, potentially get a new start. Now, what was really interesting was the fact that I got on a bike, walked 2 hours for a bike, got on that bike at 7, rode to 4 a.m. in the morning. I had a MapQuest, like a printed out MapQuest. I don't know if we even use MapQuest anymore. And
It's been a while.
It's been a while, and I had a pay-as-you-go phone, and the roads, this is all the backcountry area of like New York. There were no signs on the roads, and I got from point A to point B. And when I got to that holistic location, and I was able to kind of settle in and just kind of rethink everything, I said to myself, wait a second. I've been dealing with a crippling depression, and somehow I just managed to ride my bike for multiple hours. I was like maybe over 100 miles, something ridiculous, to get to this location where there was no street signs, and I was pretty much going by my gut, doing something that people couldn't do when they're at their peak. And that's where this idea of like flow first came to be. Like, I pretty much got into a flow state that pushed me past these boundaries I thought I had, that my depression was holding me prisoner. And it really helped me realize that I was just so much capable of more. And then I started to step away from that external locus of control and shift more towards what we call internal locus of control, which is what can I control to actually change my narrative, to change my outcome. And I created these 7 pillars, which was exercise, nutrition, sleep, community, communication, mindset, purpose. And I'd leverage those to rebuild a life for myself, that where I'm now today, where I do my peak performance coaching. I've worked with pro athletes. I work with executives and CEOs, also with flow. And I also do a lot of stuff in the business world. And I'm an athlete, and I take on these fitness feats that have drastically changed my life But for me to truly understand what flow is and the power it has, I mean, taking me, someone at the lowest of lows, on disabilities, unemployed, with thoughts of not wanting to live, and being able to, in that moment in time, do something that, many people who are beyond regular couldn't do. And that just showed me its power.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story, because I know that your story is so relatable to so many people and that it's going to help someone out there struggling. I want to know, what was the switch for you in that moment where was it being at rock bottom that really was the catalyst for making a change? Like, what was the difference that got you to choose to be in flow versus staying stuck?
I mean, that situation to me was life or death. It
Ugh.
was life or death. I mean, the level of depression I was experiencing was this constant thoughts of one in my life nonstop. And there was a lot of stigma. I mean, my parents thought, when I was talking about how poorly this place was treating me, and again, it was shut down by the Board of Mental Health, people didn't believe me because I had depression. Just regardless of what I've
Ugh.
done in the past, it's this, he has depression, he's ill. Like, we can't really trust what he's saying. So I had no one on my side. There was no one. It was just me. And literally, like, I was hitting a point that life wasn't really worth living. It was just constant suffering, and I didn't really see things getting better. Um, and it was that lowest point. And I, it was kind of like I got to this thing, and I was like, well, in my mind, which I was like, I tried so many things, and really I didn't. I really tried barely anything. It was all treatments and medications and all this stuff, but I really didn't try, me changing my scenario.
So that's that external. You were doing all the things external, but not at the internal, right?
Exactly.
Mm.
So it was hitting that lowest of lows, and it was kind of that life or death. And what's also just kind of wrap flow back in there, some of the first situations that people talk about flow that was recognized wasn't life or death situations. Wasn't situations where people were falling off a cliff or something, they survived. And there was a state of where things slowed down, and like they remember like going through different things in their life, or like assessing how they're going to position their body to fall. But for me, it was a life or death moment.
Well, I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that
Me too.
something happened and you were able to make that choice and take your power back. And one thing that you said about flow, being in the state of flow, was about everything slowing down. Do you think that being in that state in that moment kind of gave space away from, like, put space between you and your negative thoughts, you and maybe the perceived challenges at the time, and all of that? Do you think it provided that space to kind of, I think of it almost like meditation, right? Where you're like slowing things down. Is it something similar to that, like the state of it?
Yeah, I mean, so when we talk about, let's see, when we talk about flow, we also talk about a concept, cognitive load, where we can really only juggle four things in our mind at once. Beyond that, just like a computer, having multiple tabs, things get slowed down. Not slow down in a good way, slow down where you just become less productive and inefficient. Okay? On the cognitive load side, in my situation, when I kind of hit this life or death piece and I got into a flow state, I mean, I wasn't thinking about not wanting to live. I wasn't thinking about all these anxieties. It was a moment of mental clarity. I also, like, there are things called flow triggers. And one of the flow triggers is clear goals, right? That's one of the flow triggers that we work with. And my goals, because I started to lose hope, I didn't really have clear goals. But getting from point A to point B, I mean, it doesn't get clearer than that. That's
No.
just point A, point B, and that's probably one of the simplest, clearest goals I've had for a while that I just needed to move and achieve.
I love that. So when you say flow triggers, do you mean these are things that help get you into the state of flow?
Yeah, like the more
Okay.
triggers you have in a situation, the greater the likelihood you'll achieve flow. So it's like living
Mm.
a flow-rich lifestyle. The more triggers you incorporate in your life, um, the more likely you'll achieve flow. And flow is not just about work productivity. It's flows about with our relationships, our personal life, our hobbies, going on adventures, and just kind of being one with your surroundings and very present.
So tell me those 7 pillars again of flow. We have exercise. What else?
So the 7 pillars are things that I created
Mm.
to get me better and to, I guess, help also create this flow-rich lifestyle and help me build my success. But the pillars themselves were exercise, nutrition, sleep, communication, like how you communicate and interact with other people, community, who you surround yourself with, mindset. And my mindset, when I say that, that's more of like your inner dialogue, like how you're communicating to yourself, right?
Self-talk. Okay.
Self-talk, and then your overall purpose. Now, with these 7 pillars, it highlights another point that I want to emphasize about peak performance or about flow. In our world today, people like making things super complicated, or people want like the next greatest diet or biohacking, like what's the next peptide or thing that I can take to, to do whatever. And I won't even go in those conversations. I look at like those 7 pillars, I look at basics. Like even if you just look at sleep, like if someone comes to me and says, I want to get in flow state or I want to be a peak performer, I say, okay, well, what's your sleep like? They're like, well, 5 hours, 6 hours. I'm like, okay, well, get at least 7 hours consistently, maybe 7 to 9 on a regular basis for a week, and then come back and talk with me.
Really?
Because that's like the biggest cognitive enhancer you can get, right? And the same goes with the, exercise, nutrition, who you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with smart people, you're going to become smarter. If you surround yourself with people who lack intelligence, your IQ is probably going to drop. I mean, it's just like, it's very common, in communication styles, inner dialogue, and that purpose, that larger goal. I mean, they all coincide with flow, productivity, success, how you want to define that.
I love that. It's so true. Like everywhere you go, there's these hacks, quick fixes, shortcuts, top 5 ways to whatever, right? The clickbaits, the things that will get us to our end goal quicker in a shorter time. But bringing it back to the basics is so critical. I mean, something as simple as sleep can have such a major disruption to your life. Nutrition, I mean, these basics are so critical. And I think also in healthcare, probably has not even been addressed at the level it needs to be.
Sure.
Even when we're talking about mental health, right? Like, do doctors ask about these things on a base level first before us finding like the alternative treatment, right?
Well, of course, I mean, look, in the world, I'm going to talk in the world of just mental health. And
Right.
mental health is a spectrum, by the way. Mental health, the one end of the spectrum is mental illness, on the other end is peak performance. That's mental health. It's a spectrum.
Oof.
Like I've talked to people, and I also, outside of peak performance, I do some consulting with people who are struggling, and they just want some direction. But they go to a doctor and they say, these are my symptoms. They'll write a prescription, but they don't say, well, what are you eating? Or what aren't you eating? Or how many hours of sleep are you getting? Or do you exercise during the day? Or what is your home environment like? Or where are you living? I mean, those are like changes in those can drastically change the outcome.
Yeah, like let's identify the stressors first and see if we can remove those obstacles, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So important. Thank you for bringing that up and for clarifying. Can we go back to the benefits of being in flow? Can we talk
Sure.
about that? Um, Obviously, you talked about some clear benefits in terms of like when you're in that crossroads of life and death. I mean, that's a clear benefit when you're in
Yes.
flow, right?
Yeah.
Is getting into that, taking your power back, getting into an internal state of control, locus of control. So then what are benefits for those who maybe are in an average, maybe on that spectrum, they're in the middle, right? They want to just move up a little bit more. What does that look like? What are the benefits of that?
Yeah. So other benefits just include, so you think about your brain working more efficient. So if we just talk about work, okay, a common theme a while ago was work harder. flow is not about working harder. Flow is all about working smarter. In
Hmm.
fact, with flow, we talk about things like ultradian rhythms, which in a flow state, you can't hold a flow state forever. There's a point you might get burnt out. So it's knowing, I call it like riding the dragon, but it's knowing when to ride the dragon and when to get off. Where if you ride it too long and it takes you back to the cave, you get gobbled up. It's kind of just my metaphor of how I talk about it. But, you know, for regular individuals, um, with work, it's more about that working smarter. So when you're doing certain tasks, we want to close those tabs on our computer. We want to reduce that cognitive load, and we want to have that focus on that exact task at hand. All right.
Yeah.
So another thing to kind of show a differentiation, our life is anti-flow. Well, okay, let me say this.
Mm.
There's some things, our life is very polar. All right. Some things are super flow and some things are super anti-flow. I'll give you an example. Notifications on our phone, anti-flow.
Mm.
You're trying to do something, get notified, do something notified. That just adds the cognitive load and it just totally distracts you. So if you want to be in a flow state, like turn your notifications off, put your phone on do not disturb. Now, in society, there's also the dark side of flow, which is like video games where you can get really engaged and they learn how to trigger dopamine, and that's the dark side of flow, right?
TikTok.
Um,
Yeah.
TikTok, like that. I mean, it can trigger flow, and they learn how to leverage all these dopamine buttons in a way, and they call that the dark side of flow. But when we go back to the healthy side, we're looking at productivity, and they've shown that it can like 5x productivity. If you're trying to write something, it's like the opposite of having a writer's block. It's just being able to have fluid writing and
Mm.
getting it all down. Now, other areas it can be really useful in is in our personal life, engaging with our family and friends, being present,
Mm.
being in the moments,
So huge.
super huge. Or hobbies, activities, going on adventures. It's you have this immediate feedback if you're doing some outdoor activities, being around nature. But it's being fully immersed in that situation. The more flow we have, they've shown a correlation with the happier somebody is.
Mm.
So the more well-being.
And does it give you access to tapping into like even greater levels of creativity, I imagine, as
So
a byproduct?
creativity, yeah. So yes, there's also pros and cons to it. I should throw into the equation, but I would say creativity. So when they showed two scans of the brain, one was someone who was meditating and one someone who was in flow. Originally in flow, they thought the brain was firing on all cylinders. And then they realized when they saw the scan, it's actually very similar to someone who's meditating, but the brain's very quiet, but it's only activating the areas it needs to activate. It's conserving energy.
Yeah.
The one difference between meditation and someone in flow is that part of the brain that's involved in creativity. So creativity, it can be like artists can get into flow states. They're doing artwork and just get fully immersed, and hours might go by, after doing a project. Like that's also really common.
Yeah. Would you say that it's for someone to access flow, like certain personality types are able to tap it a little bit easier, maybe?
So that's a great question. I can tell you one thing. The kryptonite to flow is anxiety.
I was
Okay?
going to say worry might be a huge disruption for those getting into flow. Okay.
So if you're burdened with anxiety, that's going to be the biggest thing that's going to hinder productivity in a flow state.
Mm.
So first, just learning how to manage anxiety, practicing, mindfulness, which is a component of flow. That's really important. So personalities that tend to be obsessive, a little more obsessive compulsive, a little more geared towards anxiety, it's going to be at first harder to get into flow, but I would say it's even more important, and it probably push you to probably shift your personality to something where life's a little more comfortable and better.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, what are a few ways that someone can get into the flow? We talked about a lot of different things, from the different triggers to the different benefits, what it means to be in flow. So, if I want to get into flow, I know we've talked about, taking away distractions, but if I want to get into
Mhm.
flow, is there like a tell true way to do it, method?
Well, it depends. I mean, I've actually had talks about this with different people in research. Um, it depends. G- If I knew you, I could get you in a flow. But the
Mm,
question is, are we going to get you into a flow state in what you want to be in a flow state, doing the activity you want to be doing, right?
right.
Because usually, like, if I get to know you and understood things you enjoy, I mean, the things we enjoy and the hobbies we have a tendency to get into a flow state more often. And if I can take one of those hobbies or things that you enjoy, and some people, it's a lot of things to do with work. And if I can add what we call a challenge skill ratio, where I take something you enjoy, you have a strength in, and I add a challenge to it that's about 7 to 14% above your skill set. It's a number, it's hard to figure out, but theoretically, that's what it'd be. Like, a challenge that's a little above your skill set. And maybe I put you in an environment, minimal distractions. And gave you like a clear goal. Like, those would be a couple ways I could get you into a flow state,
Oh, I like
right?
that. So if like I'm a manager, and I have a team of individuals I'm managing, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I can incorporate in some of our conversations questions about their strengths, questions about the activities of their job that they maybe enjoy, and putting some stretch assignments in there around those things to help my employees get into flow and be productive. Am I getting it right?
Yeah, I mean, you're touching upon so many things in just one sentence. If I'll take one of those pieces. So
Okay.
you talked about time. Um, and I'll talk about, like, you're talking about working with an employee. So there's something called the Parkinson's law, and that means whatever we give, like, if we give someone an assignment and we give them an amount of time, that assignment will expand or condense that amount of time, right? Now,
Mhm.
if the time's too short, going back to my challenge to skill ratio, if that challenge is too great to their skill level and you compress that time too short, then it induces anxiety. They won't be able to get into a flow state, right? If that time you give them is too long, productivity goes up at the beginning, dials down, and kind of starts flattening out towards the end, and there's kind of a comes along a sense of boredom, right?
Mm.
So you can kind of gamify even your own things, like getting stuff done by creating time boxes and being like, okay, I got this. I'm gonna, I know I can get it done this time, but I'm gonna try to reduce it to 75% of that time and get it done. So that was one thing you said. Now, something else you talked about that I didn't mention before is that flow itself, there's an individual component to it, but there's also a group component to it.
Mm.
And then there's like this, I can't think of the name, but it's like almost like this meta flow, which is like you go to a concert and it's like everyone in a concert is like in
Oh.
sync. And that's like the massive biggest piece of flow. But when you have the individual flow, that's you kind of doing an activity, and you have group flow, which is more of like a group of people working together and having a hive mind, and just like it's almost like everyone's an extension or a limb to like one working body.
Hive mind, what is that?
I mean, well, it's the hive mind. It's just a concept I use where it's like everyone is almost on the same like wavelength. Like
Whoa, I like it.
everyone's kind of generating like someone thinks something, the next person generates the next thought. Like they're it's like it's almost like all people working together with one mind, but it's like a super mind, right?
Mhm.
Because bees they work and they have like a plan. There's this like hive mind component, but yeah, when you're in group flow, now you're taking the benefits of flow, but now a group is just like enmeshed and doing everything together.
I love that. I've never heard of that term. Okay. So Parkinson's law with time, and then we've got the individual flow, group flow, meta flow, and
I'm gonna call it,
like,
that's my term I'm making up right now, but there might be some other term for it, so we'll call that.
I love it. What else?
One thing I'll say though, going back to group flow real quick,
Okay.
and this is a big one. This is a big piece to it. I had a conversation with someone about this yesterday because we were actually talking about creating a mastermind class. And but some people are familiar with mastermind. There's one downside is a hierarchy it creates sometimes, and sometimes that doesn't always allow for great flow aspect into a group. But with group flow, you want shared egos.
Hmm.
Okay. So you want to take away that hierarchy. You want to take away that someone coming in with a higher level, someone with a lower level, and you want everyone to have equal egos, right? A great example I saw in this, if we look at Reebok, um, there's a one of the Reebok locations out here in Boston. They have a CrossFit gym in their Reebok. Now, what's cool about that, some people are fan of CrossFit, some people aren't. Side to the point is that everyone in every level with every position, more or less, goes to that CrossFit gym and works out together.
Hmm.
And it kind of makes like this shared experience, right? And so it takes whatever level someone's at, and everyone now is, wearing gym clothes and working out together. So
Uh,
there's like this ego level that gets a little shared that can kind of transition into the workplace. But that's a big one. The shared ego is a big one.
I love
Um, you
that.
know,
It's like humanizing our experience again, right? I love being able to kind of take title out of it, take status out of it. We're all human, right? Uh,
100%. Yeah, I think status and title sometimes just actually hinders productivity and efficiencies.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. I think we've touched on a lot of different parts of flow, and there's one thing that you had said about being in flow. Sometimes there's the dark side, or you can be in it too long. So when do you want to be in flow? When do you want to orchestrate that? Because it doesn't seem like we can maintain it all the time.
Well, I mean, to orchestrate it, it's yes, you can't maintain it 24/7. That just doesn't happen. And what I'll just add to that real quick is that flow has a cycle. Just so you
Okay.
better understand this. This might help. Um, there's in the beginning of the cycle of flow, there's a struggle phase. Okay. And if we're talking about work, because a lot of people here are probably thinking about how do I leverage flow in work, or if you're talking about someone who's in school, there's a struggle phase where to get into flow, you expect there's going to be a struggle to begin with. You're kind of overloading information, you're running things down, you're creating a plan. And once you understand that part of flow is a struggle, you can become at peace with it. And it's called then a graceful struggle. Okay.
Oh.
And then you go through a graceful struggle. After that, you step away, like go for a walk outdoors, go for a place where you can like reduce that cognitive load, let your brain, let that knowledge settle in, and then come back to that activity. And then you're more than likely to get into a flow state. All right. And then after being in that flow state for a period of time, you're also going to expect to have a recovery state. And when you're in that recovery state, you might feel a little bit low. And that's a time you don't want to take your emotions too serious, but your brain has just release so many neurotransmitters that now like everything's released and it kind of needs to reboot.
Ugh.
Right. So understanding that cycle, I think is really important because it then starts to make a lot of sense and people don't get so frustrated. Um, and how often or when you do it, it takes practice. But I want to go back to like the community environment piece or just our environments. I I mean, I'm lucky, I'm fortunate. Where I live right here, I have right in front of me, I live on the beach. I live in the ocean. And that scenery, that vast amount of openness for me, just I do work, I'll talk with people, I look out there, my cognitive load just drops,
Mm.
right? So
Speaks to me.
speaks to your environment, or I put flowers on my desk, things that are calming, nature like, those all can really help. And for everyone, it's a little trial and error. People different parts of the days, working on different activities. But I mean, that's why you also work with a coach to kind of learn of what works best with you.
Yeah. So we could work with a flow coach like yourself, but just to take it back around to the flow cycle, let me see if I can do you justice in recapping. We start with a struggle phase,
Mhm.
and we need to get into some sort of acceptance with that in order to move into a graceful struggle.
Mhm.
And then at that point, we can reduce our cognitive load by going and taking a break, getting the distractions out of our place, removing disruptors. And then you can come back to the activity, be in that state of flow, and then you need to recover. And we
Yep.
don't want to take our emotions too seriously, as you said, but we do need to recover. How do we recover?
This is a great question. Now, we think of recovery a lot. A lot of people will think of fitness, right?
Mm.
You break a muscle down. I'll say this. When you go to the gym, you don't get stronger in a gym. You actually get stronger from recovery.
Mm-hmm.
People like think about that for a second. Like, wait, you're actually right. Yeah, the recovery is essential. That's where a lot of the magic happens. That's where a lot of our knowledge settles in. Now there's passive recovery and there's active recovery. All right, recovery is our chance to reboot. And a while ago, or now, even I work with a lot of people on this. Is look, I tell people, you want to get a flow, you want to get more done. All right, you need to actually work less during the day. Like, I actually want you to work, you work 90 to 120 minutes, like blocks, or we figure out what the best block of time for you. But then we're going to take like 15 to 20 minutes off of active recovery. And people struggle with that. They're like, wait a second, but then I'm not working. I'm like, but it doesn't matter, because when
You'd
you
be
do
more
work,
productive.
exactly, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
be more productive. So think of output instead of hours in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and now the question goes into like, well, how do you define active recovery? A simple answer is doing recovery with purpose. Okay. So if I step back again, passive recovery is like I'm sitting on the couch having a beer or water or whatever and watching TV. That's passive recovery. It's really not great recovery. There's certain wavelengths in your brains that are being activated. There's still a cognitive load going on by watching that TV. It's not that great, right? Maybe after a while you'll hit a recovery point, but it doesn't really do justice.
Mm-hmm.
But when we do things like breathing techniques, okay, so like circular breathing, if we do things with mindfulness, like I love going on mindfulness walks where like I'll walk outdoors, and or if you're driving, even you can do this. It's looking at your senses. Like, what do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? What do you feel? And just really saying things very factually, stepping away from judgment. Like, nothing is, don't say this is pretty, that's ugly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really stepping towards just more facts and what's right in front of you and being very present. An extreme situation, if you're like let's just say you had back to back, 5 Zoom meetings, had a board meeting, and you're like at overload. Like, my go-to hard reset is like, if you're at home where you have the ability, jump in the shower, put it at full cold, and like try staying in there for a few minutes, or jump into a cold bath. That's a hard reset. Like, in that situation, there's nothing you're going to be thinking about except how cold that water is, and that will like disrupt your thinking patterns.
So is that the purpose of that's what it does? It just disrupts you, takes you out of the cognitive overload that you're in.
Like a cold plunge.
Plunge, yeah. I did that the other day. I did like a sauna, steam room, and then I was talking with someone that was in there about how cool it would be if we could have like a plunge pool. And they're like, oh, well, the pool's open. It's like 40 degrees outside. I'm like, you're right. It kind of is a cold plunge pool. So I just jumped in and it was like an incredible feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different benefits to cold therapy,
Mhm.
but one of it is just, I mean, you're just so immersed in it that like there's nothing else you're gonna think about how cold that water is. It's
Yeah.
just, and then it's just a uni thought, that one thought, everything else gets erased, and it kind of hits that reset button.
Love that. Okay. Okay. So the hard reset, you would do breath work or breathing exercises, mindfulness, that present moment awareness, the body scan or environmental scan, moving away from like the judgment. I love that. You're going to scare people when you tell them, when they hear um, work less in a week, right? And I think that is such an interesting thing that you say, because there's a lot of debate going on around let's move to a 4-day work week, right? We've seen that in the news or in articles for a while now. And that makes me think about the Parkinson's law, right? Like the time that you give yourself, you will expand to meet that time frame or that box. So if we give ourselves 40 hours to work a week, we're going to take 40 hours to work a week. If we give ourselves 30 or, 25, we'll take 25 potentially, right? There's probably some balance, I imagine, between that pressure point and the
Sure.
good challenge.
Yeah. No, there 100% is. I with I was with a client recently who I work with a lot of people who measure happiness on what they get done in a given day, or how how many things they get done, or how many hours of work they put in. And you know, I've had to shift a lot of their thinkings to be like, well, let's actually break down the day into goals. Let's break down the week into goal, and then let's break down the days into different chunks of time depending on things and what those different goals are. And if we hit that goal, stop, take a rest. Conserve your energy, get ready for the next thing you're going to do, right? And then people start finding ways to kind of get, better at doing things a little quicker. And they start to actually acknowledge and realize, all the productivity they have, or where they're excelling, or where their weak points are, instead of just push, 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 push.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this conversation has been one of my favorites. I feel like I've learned so much. Is there anything else that we need to know about flow, Alex?
Anything else about flow? Ooh, that is the ending with a very broad question. Um, I would say it's really once you kind of understand, or once you become the first step to flow or really incorporate in your life is learning about it, becoming more aware of it. And then once you kind of have moments in your life, you have flow and you're like, wait a second, that was a flow state. Then you'll start to figure out how to leverage those moments to build more flow.
Mm.
But flow, I just find, is something that's so beautiful, and it just really grounds us in reality. And the more you have in your life, the happier you are. I mean, that's what we've shown.
Yeah. Can you also, real quick, share what does gratitude have to do with being in a flow state? Or does it have any, are there any like correlation between the two?
So gratitude is actually a big thing that I love myself. And if we talk about well-being, let's say if we talk about mindset, or we talk about reduced cognitive load, or we talk about reducing anxiety. When you
Good.
practice a daily gratitude, and I'll give you an example of what has the most benefit. Let's say every day you write down 3 things, but 3 very, very specific things that happen to that day. The more specific, the better. Use times, names. You do that on a regular basis. When we hit challenging moments in our life that, let's say, like, start increasing anxieties or bringing in negative thoughts, the more gratitude we do, it becomes a lot easier to replace those negative thoughts with positive thoughts and things we're thankful for. So then instead of getting derailed, we can get right back on track,
Mm.
right? And then that, having those positive thoughts come in, all of a sudden that spiraling that can happen with anxieties and worrying starts to get reduced. And then we can start to be more present in our everyday life.
So we can change our neural patterns, right? If
Yes.
we can adjust to a new behavior, to this new type of thinking, this new practice. What I love about gratitude, and I have a gratitude practice myself daily. Um, when I'm in like a really poor place mentally, or just a
Yep.
really dark place, it can sometimes feel really hard to find things that you're grateful for. But there's this mantra I have when I get into a gratitude practice. It's like, reach for the next best thing. You don't have to look for something that was incredibly like amazing, out of this world, that to be thankful for, right? Like, especially if you're in a place where something didn't go the way that you had hoped for, you're really disappointed, there's still something that you can reach for. I have a roof over my head. I have food that I was able to eat. I don't need to look for my next meal. There's got to be something that we can reach for. And so that always has helped shift me out of a darker place or a negative place. And I don't know if maybe that could help someone who's listening.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with what you're saying.
Well,
Very,
I
very
have
much so.
one final question for you. I ask this on all of my episodes to just kind of wrap us up. what is the most recent paradigm shift that you've experienced, whether it's related to this work around flow or something else completely different?
A big shift in my life. Um, ooh, this is a great question. I would say, I mean, I'm at a point in my life where I'm definitely, I'm doing this fitness feed, doing all this business stuff, and trying to balance out a social life. And I think there's a lot of power into the words of saying no. Meaning, there's a lot of times that people will ask things of you or pull you into different activities, or there'll be different opportunities. And it can sometimes be really beneficial, but I started to really dive into what my limits are and how much of myself I can offer out there, and just really getting better and hitting my limits at saying no and staying true to what's already on my plate, and just making sure I can follow through on what I already have.
Yeah. What have you found that's helped you say no more often?
Um, I sometimes write reminders of what my values are. I have little reminders of what my main priorities on a priority list are that I'll look at every once in a while. Um, I have an assistant where I'll be like, well, let me just check in with my assistant. And she'll send me reminders of, Alex, nope, can't do that. I'm like, okay, just check. So it's kind of like, that's like my opt out. Um, but yeah, I mean, if also someone doesn't feel right,
Yeah.
if it's and I talk about, I do things with different people in business. If the energy with a person doesn't feel good, I think that's a good enough reason. Even if it's one of the best business deals, do good deals with good people. So I
Yeah.
look for energy. I look for how much I can offer my energy. But yeah, there's a couple little strategies.
I love that. Thank you so much. I think that's such an effective way to disrupt the disruptors, right? By saying no, then you can actually probably get into flow a little bit more quicker if you don't have all those distractions going on.
100%.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your insights, and I will leave all of your information in the show notes so that if people want to reach out to you or other flow coaches like yourself, they'll have the information they need to do so. Thank you.
Perfect. My pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to leave a review, rate, and subscribe wherever you're listening. If you know a business leader in practice or friend who you think would be interested in this episode, please consider sharing it with them. I'm so grateful for your support. For more updates, you can follow us at Paradigm Shifts Podcast on Instagram. See you on the next episode.